The most dangerous person in any room is the one you can't control and can't confuse. Now imagine this for a moment, chosen one. You're standing in a room full of smoke. Everyone's coughing, panicking, reaching for exits, but you're calm. Why? Because you see the fire's not real. It's just a fog machine. That's what your life became when you woke up to the tricks. The manipulation, the emotional guilt-tripping, the silent games. You saw the wires, the buttons, the illusion behind the drama. And when you didn't react, their whole act fell apart. That's why they're heated. Not because you did something wrong, but because you finally did something right. You stopped giving them power. Here's a fact. Psychological manipulation depends on response. No reaction, no fuel. Studies in emotional psychology show that people who refuse to engage in manipulative patterns cause the other person to spiral, because the game only works when you play. But you didn't play, did you? You sat still while they tried to provoke you. You smiled when they expected a breakdown. You grew quiet when they needed chaos. And that silence, that unbothered peace, it's not just powerful, it's offensive to them, because you're proof that their control is an illusion. And thank you, chosen one, for making it this far. Don't forget to pay this message forward by simply pressing like and subscribe. Help spread this light to more souls. It's our mission now to awaken, to heal, to expose the games and uplift the ones who see clearly. You're not just watching this by chance. You're part of a force, a rising wave of clarity. You are the glitch in their matrix, and they can't handle it. Now back to the truth. You were never meant to be controlled. You were born with something they can't understand. Clarity, intuition, and an inner knowing that doesn't bend to sweet talk or threats. From the start, they thought you'd be easy to manipulate. Maybe you were quiet, empathic. Maybe you gave second chances. Maybe you forgave when they didn't deserve it. But what they missed, what they completely underestimated, is that you see energy, not just words. And once you felt that something was off, you didn't argue, you simply unplugged. That's the moment everything shifted. You didn't send paragraphs. You didn't explain yourself. You just stopped showing up for the performance, and that silence broke them. Because here's another truth. Manipulators fear people who don't explain, don't chase, and don't engage. You're that fear in human form now. You became unpredictable, and to someone who feeds off control, your peace is chaos. They're heated, yes. But it's not just anger, it's fear. Fear that their mask no longer works. Fear that their charm holds no weight. Fear that someone finally saw the little insecure child behind all that ego. And now they're scrambling, trying to find new ways to get your attention, to pull you back in, to remind themselves they still matter. But every time you don't react, every time you keep walking without looking back, the universe screams louder. This one cannot be moved. They're telling stories now, making up versions of you to feel better about the version they can no longer reach. But the truth? Their voice is cracking, their lies are showing, because you weren't dramatic, you were done. And when a chosen one is done, it's not an announcement. It's an energetic shift. So remember this. You broke the cycle without shouting. You ended the game without playing. And now you're the villain in every manipulator's fairy tale. Let them talk. Let them sweat. Let them malfunction. Because the moment they realized their manipulation had no effect on you, that's the moment you became unforgettable. Stay right here. This message is about to go even deeper, and by the end of it, you'll know exactly why they're pressed, paranoid, and powerless in your presence. So before we break it down step by step, I need you to do something bold, chosen one. if you know deep in your soul that your silence, your clarity, your refusal to play the manipulation game is the reason they're spiraling, then drop the number 777 in the comments right now. Not just as a sign that you're awake, but as a message to every soul out there who's been gaslit, guilt-tripped, and underestimated. And if you feel called, show love to the team behind this message with a super thanks, because exposing the truth, staying consistent, and delivering real energy like this, it takes time, strength, and a mission bigger than ego. Whether it's a cent or more, your support fuels this light. And now, let's get into the real reason they're so heated, step by step, layer by layer. If you're a true chosen one, you won't just watch. You'll feel every word pulling you deeper. Let's begin. Number 1. They tried to trap you in the fog, but you walked out with the truth and burned their script. The moment you stopped asking for their version of the truth was the moment they lost control of the story. They're not mad because you hurt them. They're mad because you saw them, fully, clearly, and you didn't flinch. That's what burns the most. You didn't scream. You didn't fight for understanding. You just stepped back, tilted your head, and said, "You think I don't see you, don't you?" That one moment, your clarity, ripped the mask off the performance they'd spent years perfecting. See, most people get emotionally tangled in the web. Manipulators don't attack you with fists, they attack with fog, with confusion, with just enough guilt, charm, and contradiction to make you question your own reality. They don't need to overpower you, they just need to mislead you. But you, chosen one, you didn't just escape the maze, you set fire to the blueprints. You didn't ask for their side of the story. You looked at the facts. You asked real questions they couldn't answer. You noticed when their words were smooth, but their energy was crooked. You caught them rehearsing feelings they didn't have. And once you did, they couldn't breathe in your presence anymore. Now they're heated, and let me tell you why. Because you've become the one thing every manipulator fears, a mirror they can't crack. You didn't just survive the manipulation, you outgrew it. You stopped needing their approval, stopped seeking closure, stopped reacting when they baited you, and when you refused to chase the truth in their chaos. They realized you'd built your own clarity without them. You didn't take the bait, you took your power back. And here's what most people don't get. A manipulator only exists in the space between your doubts. That's where they work. That's where they twist. But you sealed up that space with awareness, with calm, with boundaries so firm they had nowhere to slip in. Let's make this brutally clear. Their entire identity was built on being able to twist your perception, and now they've lost the only power they ever had: confusion. You didn't get lost in their noise. You listened deeper. You stopped falling for the emotion in their voice and started asking why their words never matched their patterns. You didn't try to understand anymore. You observed. And that observation, that stillness, that shattered them. Because here's the truth they'll never say out loud. Manipulators aren't strong. They're strategic. They don't win through honesty. They win through distraction. So when you stopped playing along, they didn't just lose you. They lost control. Let me ask you something, chosen one. Have you ever watched someone change their entire story in real time the moment they realize you're not buying it? Have you seen the panic behind their calm, the twitch behind their smile? That's what happens when a manipulator realizes they can't rewrite the script anymore because you've already memorized the truth. You've become immune to their fog. You no longer take words at face value. You measure actions. You read patterns. You look for what's missing, not just what's being said. And that level of perception, that mental strength, That's a kind of freedom they'll never know. Now, let me give you a visual, chosen one. They were counting on you walking through their funhouse mirror of lies, getting dizzy, losing direction, and asking them how to get out. But instead, you stood still, took one step back, and realized it was all smoke and reflection. You didn't scream, you just smashed the mirror and walked straight through. You didn't react, you redirected. And every time you didn't respond to the guilt trip, every time you didn't explain yourself to their false accusations, every time you didn't chase the closure they weaponized, you proved something they hate. Clarity beats confusion every single time. Let's go even deeper. You didn't just break free, you rewrote the whole narrative. You stopped being the crazy one, the emotional one, the too sensitive one, and now you're the one that every manipulator warns others about. Not because you're dangerous, but because you know better now. Because you won't be fooled again. You don't argue anymore, you observe. You don't fight for your spot, you know your worth. And when someone tries to play mental gymnastics, you don't jump in the ring, you walk out of the stadium. That's why they're heated. You turn their mind games into a solo performance, and without an audience, their whole act collapses. You've become what they fear, unbothered, untouchable, unavailable. They can't stand the fact that you sleep peacefully while they rehearse fake arguments in the mirror. They can't handle that you're thriving while their mask is slipping. And the deeper truth, they're not just angry at you, they're ashamed of themselves because they know you saw the real them and left anyway. So let them rage, let them talk, let them throw dirt on your name to clean the mud off their own. You don't need to fight it, you already won. Because you didn't just survive their manipulation, you exposed it. And they'll never forget that. Stay sharp, chosen one. The fog is clearing, and you're the light they never prepared for. Number 2. They can't hijack what you've locked down. Your emotional discipline is their worst nightmare. You don't destroy a manipulator by yelling. You destroy them by staying silent while they self-destruct. Imagine this, chosen one. They light a match and throw it at your feet, waiting for you to panic, waiting for you to scream, dance in the flames, or run wild trying to put the fire out. But instead, you just stare at it. You let the flame burn out on its own, because you know it was never big enough to threaten your peace. That's what emotional discipline looks like, and that's why they're shaking. You didn't react, you didn't scream, you didn't fight the way they expected. You kept your cool, you breathed through the trigger. And that, right there, that's what's got them heated. Because they don't know how to function without your chaos. Let's get this straight. Manipulators don't fear confrontation, they fear control. Your control over your words, over your reactions, over your emotions. The one who controls the emotion controls the energy, and the one who controls the energy controls the room. That's you now, and they hate that, because you no longer hand over your energy on demand. They tried everything, those passive-aggressive jokes, the guilt trips disguised as concern, the sudden silence, the dramatic outbursts, all of it carefully timed and crafted to shake your emotional foundation. Because if they could get a rise out of you, they could twist your words, blur your logic, and make you doubt your sanity. But you flipped the entire script by not giving them what they wanted. You didn't shrink. You centered, you didn't explode, you observed. And that, chosen one, is the equivalent of emotional warfare to a manipulator, because they've lost access to the one weapon they thought they could always count on, your reaction. When they can no longer pull your strings, they start saying you're heartless. But don't be fooled. What they're really saying is, I miss the version of you I could manipulate. they'll try to flip the narrative. You've changed. You're cold now. You don't care. But none of that is true. What's true is this. You finally stopped offering your heart to people who only came to play with it. They don't understand that discipline doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel everything, but you don't perform for it. You feel the anger, but you don't throw dishes. You feel the hurt, but you don't beg for closure. You feel the betrayal, but you don't make a scene. You just sit in your awareness and watch them expose themselves, trying to get a reaction. Imagine being a burglar who breaks into a house and finds nothing to steal. That's what it feels like for them now. They keep trying to trigger the old version of you, the one that used to cry, scream, over-explain, apologize for things you didn't do. But that version? Gone. Dead and buried under all the lessons you finally learned the hard way. And what replaced it? An unshakable wall of self-control. They keep pushing, you keep watching, they keep acting, you keep breathing. Your silence isn't weakness, it's evidence that you no longer need to scream to be powerful. That's what they don't get. They were counting on the old you, the one who couldn't sleep if someone was mad at you, the one who would lose peace trying to prove your intention. But this version of you, you sleep just fine, knowing that truth doesn't need a defense. Here's a question you might ask yourself, but does staying calm mean I'm letting them get away with it? No, chosen one. Staying calm means you're not giving them another moment of your emotional labor. It means you've retired from the game they thought they could keep playing forever. And now they're scrambling, not because you said something, but because you didn't. They feed off attention, whether it's love or rage. They don't care which one, as long as it gives them center stage. But you stole the spotlight back by doing the most unexpected thing: nothing. You're not unreachable. You're just untouchable now. Because emotional discipline is not numbness, it's wisdom. It's power. It's knowing that not every battle deserves your energy, and that not every person deserves an answer. They can't twist your emotions if you don't hand them the steering wheel. You've learned to pause before responding. You've learned to breathe before believing. You've learned that not every attack is worth a reaction, and that silence can be a louder message than any argument. Let me give you one last metaphor to drive it home. Imagine you're a boxer. The crowd's loud, the punches are coming, but instead of swinging wildly, you study your opponent. You let them throw everything they've got, and when they get tired, you land one clean hit and walk away. That's what you've done emotionally. You didn't panic. You strategized. You endured. And now, they're exhausted, because fighting someone who won't swing back is the fastest way to burn yourself out. They're not angry at your detachment. They're terrified by your control, because it reminds them of everything they don't have: self-respect, clarity, discipline, peace. And now, chosen one, you've become the emotional wall they can't climb, the calm they can't corrupt, the mirror they can't lie to. You didn't just shut the door on them. You locked it with awareness, bricked it with discipline, and sealed it with silence. That's why they're heated, because emotional chaos was their playground, and you just took away the keys. Number 3. You walked away from the table, so they starved without control. The moment you stopped needing their acceptance, they lost their grip on your obedience. They never expected you to actually leave. They thought you'd keep quiet to keep your place, that you'd trade authenticity for approval, that you'd shrink a little more each day just to keep a seat at their rigged table. But you didn't. You stood up, took your voice with you, and walked out. And that moment, That's when their manipulation turned to madness. Imagine this, chosen one. A puppet show with no strings attached. The puppet walks off stage. The puppeteer panics. The audience gasps. That's what happened when you stopped needing to belong in a system that required your silence. You weren't defiant. You were done, and they never saw it coming. Most people stay because the room offers the illusion of peace. Keep your head down, they're told. Be agreeable. But that peace, it's not peace. It's emotional blackmail wrapped in applause. If being included requires betrayal of self, it's not inclusion, it's submission. But you chose something stronger. Freedom. Freedom from fake smiles, from forced conversations, from being liked for who you're not instead of loved for who you are. Let's be real. Manipulators use belonging as bait. They dress control up as community, acceptance as a performance, and rejection as punishment. But you broke the system the second you said, "Keep your applause. I'm keeping my soul." You stopped playing the part, and that's when their power collapsed. You're not desperate for group hugs anymore. You don't need validation from people who never saw you clearly. And that kind of independence, it's terrifying to them, because they know they can't bribe you back with compliments, fake praise, or empty inclusion. You've already seen the price tag, and it costs too much, your truth. Here's what eats them alive. You were supposed to beg to stay. You were supposed to fight for their acceptance, but instead you walked out, smiling. You didn't just leave the room, you exposed it, and now they're whispering, making up reasons for your exit, calling you difficult, cold, arrogant. But the truth is, they're just angry they couldn't keep you small. Once you stop auditioning for rooms that don't deserve you, your spirit expands. So let them talk. Let them call it isolation. You know it as liberation. You didn't lose a seat. You declined the invitation. And now they're choking on their own approval game. Number 4, they can't run the game. When you've memorized the script. They didn't go silent because you were wrong. They went silent because you were right too early. They hate how fast you see it now. They hate that you don't need proof to trust your gut. They hate that you don't wait until the betrayal hits, the lie explodes, or the tears fall. You already know. Before they even press play, you've already spotted the plot twist, decoded the fake apology, and predicted the ending. And that makes you lethal to their control, their manipulation, their whole performance. Imagine this, chosen one. Someone hands you a drink, smiling, friendly, but you've smelled that poison before. You recognize the scent. You watch how they hold the glass, how their eyes twitch just a little too long, how their words are just a beat too rehearsed. So you don't drink. They smile harder, a little more desperate now, but you just set the glass down, thank them for the offer, and walk away. That's what you do now, with people, with energy, with patterns. You're not reactive, you're preemptive. You don't wait for the impact. You spot the wind before the storm. You've seen the cycle too many times, the charm, the closeness, the contradiction, the confusion, the crash, and the gaslighting at the end. Not anymore. Experience is your radar, and once you've survived enough storms, you don't wait for thunder to trust the clouds. They can't exploit you because they can't catch you sleeping anymore. You've trained your intuition like a weapon. You read pauses like paragraphs. You spot tone shifts like red lights. One flicker in their energy, and you already know what's coming. And that awareness, that scares them. They call you paranoid now. Too guarded, too intense. But really, what they're saying is, I can't get away with anything around you, because now you listen to your gut louder than their words. You walk into every situation with eyes wide open and ears tuned to frequency, not flattery. They wanted you to be naive again, to play dumb, to ignore the smoke and wait for the explosion. But you don't live in hope anymore. You live in truth. And truth, for manipulators, is pure poison. When they realize you don't need to see the fire to know there's smoke, the game ends before it begins. That's why they're scared. You won't let them finish the first act. You've already seen how it ends. And this time, you're not playing the fool. You're the one pulling the curtain down. Number 5, they couldn't buy you, bend you, or break you, so now they call you the problem. When your soul's not for sale, the manipulators leave empty-handed and exposed. They came to trade, attention for silence, praise for compliance, fake loyalty for your obedience, but when they realized none of it moved you, that's when the panic set in. They can't stand the fact that you live by something they can't manipulate. Integrity, real, raw, untouchable truth. Not situational, not performative. And that ruins everything for them. See, manipulators don't just use threats. They use shiny offers. Be quiet and I'll protect you. Play along and I'll open doors for you. Don't speak up and I'll make sure you're accepted. But your silence can't be bought, your yes can't be negotiated, and your values, non-refundable. Imagine this, chosen one. You walk into a room full of merchants trying to sell influence, favor, and fake friendship. But instead of shopping, you build a wall and put up a sign, not for sale. They circle you. They try discounts, pressure, guilt. And when none of it works, they call you cold, proud, uncooperative. But what they're really saying is, I can't move this one. I can't break them down like I did the others. They assumed you had a price. Everyone does, right? Wrong. You're not driven by desperation. You've walked away from more than most people beg for because peace matters more than position. And what they'll never understand is, you're not hard to work with, you're just not easy to manipulate. You've been through the fire, you know what it costs to betray yourself, and you're not paying that price again. You've played along before, smiled through discomfort, nodded through lies, said yes when your whole body screamed no, and the regret that followed, it built a version of you that refuses to bend. Now, they hate you for the same thing they once admired, your unshakable clarity. They can't hold anything over your head, not approval, not secrets, not promises, because you've detached from everything that requires self-betrayal to keep. So they get loud. They label you difficult. But you know better. Difficult just means you have a backbone they couldn't twist. That's why they're fuming, because the one thing they needed to exploit you, flexibility in your truth, is the one thing you'll never give. They're not mad you walked away. They're mad you didn't hesitate, and now they'll never get that power back. Number 6. You said no and meant it. That's why they're spiraling. Manipulators don't break when you say no. They break when you stop explaining why. There was a time when you handed out explanations like candy, thinking if you just made them understand, they'd back off. You'd write out your reasons in emotional paragraphs. You'd soften your no with maybe next time or I just feel bad. But all that kindness, they weaponized it. They turned your clarity into confusion, your guilt into leverage, your empathy into entry points, but not anymore. Now your no comes clean, no fluff, no performance, No emotional discount for people who already knew what they were doing. And that makes them furious. Imagine this, chosen one. They knock on your door like they used to, expecting the same welcome mat, the same warm conversation, the same doorway back into your energy. But when the door doesn't open, and more importantly, when it doesn't come with an apology or excuse, they don't know what to do with themselves. Because manipulators don't fear rejection, they fear indifference, a quiet, grounded no with no emotional strings. That's a dead end they can't rewire. The longer your explanation, the more rope you hand them to hang your peace with. You've stopped playing defense. You've stopped asking permission to protect yourself. And it's driving them mad. They're scanning your silence for loopholes, waiting for you to blink. Because every no used to be a negotiation. Now it's a sentence, a boundary, a wall with no handles. They try the usual tricks: guilt, shame, twisting your words. You used to care. You're not the same. You've changed. But they're not wrong. You have changed. You don't explain yourself to people who made a career out of misunderstanding you. Respect doesn't ask for reasons. Control always does. And now, you don't give energy to people who ask questions just to argue with the answer. That's what's burning them. Because when you stop explaining yourself, they lose access. And when manipulators lose access, they lose control. You didn't slam the door. You just removed the hinges. No speech, no drama, no warning, just stillness so solid they finally had to sit in their own emptiness. That's the sound of your power returning. And that silence? It speaks louder than anything you ever said. Number 7. They wanted worshippers, but you showed up with X-ray vision. They wear masks. You see spirits. That's why you were never meant to follow them. You were sent to expose them. They don't fear exposure by evidence. They fear exposure by energy, because most people still fall for the surface, the script, the tears, the role, the sob story, the spiritual quotes, the carefully filtered leadership image. But you've got a different kind of vision. You don't just look, you read. You don't just hear, you feel. And that kind of perception, it wrecks their whole performance before the show even starts. Imagine this, chosen one. Everyone's clapping for the actor on stage. The lights are perfect, the words are rehearsed. The crowd is hypnotized, but you're in the back, silent, watching. Not the words, but the vibration behind them. You don't buy the act. You don't need the curtains to fall to know it's fake. You already felt the emptiness behind the applause. That's what your presence does. You don't confront with noise, you confront with knowing. And that knowing is devastating. They lied with words, but their energy confessed before their mouth even opened. That's what burns them. They're used to blind followers, people who follow popularity, charisma, or pity plays, people who confuse performance with power. But you don't follow what's loud, you follow what's real. If the alignment's off, you're gone. No debate, no drama, no explaining, just gone. And that's terrifying to them, because they built their kingdom on illusion, and you walk in like truth with legs. You don't need them to mess up to see it's wrong. You don't need a scandal to walk away. You trusted your gut long before the evidence ever showed up. And that trust, that inner clarity, that's a kind of strength they can't mimic. Real leaders don't need followers. They create other leaders. Manipulators do the opposite. That's why they fear you. You're not moved by charm. You're not impressed by status. You're not seduced by sob stories wrapped in control. You know energy. You know patterns. You don't ask, are they good? You ask, does this feel clean? And when it doesn't, you disappear. No apology, no explanation, just spiritual silence so powerful it cracks their mask from the inside. They wanted admiration. You gave them awareness, and that awareness, it ended the illusion the moment you entered the room. Number 8, you didn't fall for the compliment, so their whole plan fell apart. When you already know your worth, sweet words taste like manipulation. They didn't come at you with insults. They came at you with smiles, compliments that dripped with sugar, praise that felt a little too perfect, admiration that seemed a bit too early, too loud, too rehearsed. They weren't trying to love you. They were trying to lower your guard. Because here's the game, chosen one. Manipulators don't always attack with cruelty. Sometimes they lead with charm. And charm, when it comes too fast, too thick, and too soon, is often the quietest kind of threat. They weren't clapping for you because they meant it. They were clapping to distract you long enough to put a leash around your self-esteem. But it didn't work on you. Why? Because you weren't thirsty. You weren't standing there hoping someone would finally tell you you're special. You already knew. And when someone tries to hand praise to a person who's already full, the transaction fails. Real confidence isn't fed by compliments. It's protected from them. You didn't melt. You didn't chase. You didn't suddenly become loyal because someone called you rare, powerful, or chosen. You heard the tone. You felt the shift. You asked yourself, why now? Why this kind of praise, and what do they want in return? Because you've been here before. You've seen how flattery flips into control. You've watched people clap one moment, then criticize the next, right after you said no. You've seen how false support quickly becomes emotional blackmail when you stop being agreeable. So now, you don't let compliments blind you. You measure them. You test them. You ask yourself if the person behind them could handle your boundaries, or if they only like you when they can bend you. And when you saw the truth behind their sugar-coated strategy, you didn't get angry. You just stayed solid, still, unmoved. That's what crushed them. They were used to people folding under flattery. But you didn't get soft. You got sharper. They realized they couldn't bait you with admiration because you weren't trying to be admired. You were walking in self-respect, not performance. When you stop needing to be impressed, manipulators lose their grip because without your awe, their charm becomes useless. You didn't fall for it, and that's why they're furious. You saw the trap before the praise finished leaving their lips, and in that moment, they knew they could never lead someone like you. Number 9. You didn't burn their mask, you just refused to applaud, and it all fell apart. You didn't expose them with your mouth, you exposed them with your silence. They wanted admiration, not eyes that could see. They wanted applause, not awareness. But when they stepped onto the stage, expecting another easy audience, you just sat there, still, unimpressed. And that was enough to unravel everything they spent years pretending to be. Because here's the truth, chosen one. Their influence was never real. It was a carefully glued together illusion, built on charm, fear, guilt, fake authority, and emotional intimidation. They don't lead from substance, they lead from image. And when someone stops buying the image, their power doesn't just weaken, it disintegrates. Influence without truth is just control dressed in charisma. You didn't confront them, you didn't drag them, you didn't shout. You just stopped nodding. And when you did, people noticed. Because the moment someone others admire suddenly steps away with no hate, no drama, no gossip, just quiet distance, it forces the room to think. Why didn't she follow them? Why isn't he impressed? What does she see that we're missing? That's the danger of your clarity. You didn't expose them with a speech. You exposed them by being the only one who wouldn't clap for the show. And in a world addicted to performance, stillness is rebellion. Imagine this. Everyone's at the parade, cheering. The leader walks by in royal robes until one person whispers, "They're not wearing anything," and suddenly the crowd blinks. That's you, that whisper, that mirror. You didn't try to destroy their influence. You just stopped pretending it was real. That's what they'll never forgive you for. Not the leaving, not the silence, but the fact that you became proof. Proof that their power only worked on those who didn't look too closely. Proof that someone could walk away untouched. Proof that fear only works if you feed it. The illusion of power can't survive one awakened witness. And you didn't just wake up. You walked away so gracefully it made others question what they were still clapping for. Now they scramble harder, they talk louder, they praise themselves more. Because without your silent agreement, their mask keeps slipping, and everyone is starting to notice. You didn't bring the house down, you just stopped holding it up, and the whole thing started to collapse. Number 10. You don't carry their shame anymore, so their power over you crumbled. The moment you stopped apologizing for protecting yourself, you became untouchable to manipulators. They don't miss your kindness. They miss how they used to control it. They miss how one well-placed sigh, one guilt-laced sentence, one passive-aggressive tone could make you fold. They miss how you used to say yes just to avoid the weight of their disappointment. But those days are done. You've upgraded. And now, guilt bounces off your boundaries like bullets off armor. They used to twist your empathy like a rope around your own neck. They told you that choosing yourself was selfish, that silence was cruelty, that rest was laziness, that no was rebellion. But what they were really saying was, I need you to feel bad so I can keep benefiting from your self-abandonment. And for a while, it worked. You overextended. You said yes with a heavy heart. You swallowed your truth to keep the peace, because they dressed manipulation in morality. They didn't come as villains. They came cloaked in concern. If you loved me, you'd do this. I thought you were different. You're not being kind. No, you were being used. But now, chosen one, you see the trick. And more importantly, you feel the difference. You've learned that genuine love doesn't demand self-erasure, that real connection doesn't require submission, and that peace built on silence is just control in disguise. They didn't respect your kindness. They expected your obedience. You've stopped performing. You've stopped carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. You no longer bend because someone throws a tantrum when you set a boundary. You don't explain rest. You don't apologize for space. You don't debate your no like it's negotiable. And that, right there, is what makes them spiral. They've lost access to their favorite weapon, guilt. Because once guilt can't move you, they lose every handle they had. Now they call you selfish, cold, changed. But that's just their way of saying, I can't use you anymore. Imagine this. They spent years training you to prioritize their comfort. But the day you said, I deserve to be comfortable too, their whole control system glitched. You didn't become heartless. You became honest. You didn't stop loving people. You stopped abandoning yourself to do it. And once you stop betraying your soul for approval, there's nothing left for them to weaponize. That's why they're crumbling. Because you finally realized your peace is sacred, and guilt isn't the price for keeping it. Number 11. They can't control you anymore because you'd rather be real than be liked. The day you chose inner peace over fake harmony, they lost their power and you found your freedom. They never feared your anger. They feared your truth. Because as long as you kept swallowing it to keep the room calm, they were winning. As long as you kept smiling through discomfort, nodding through manipulation, and apologizing just to keep things smooth, they had control. But the moment you said, "No more, I'm not betraying myself to protect their comfort," everything changed. They don't fear conflict. They fear the version of you that's finally done avoiding it. Manipulators don't thrive in chaos. They thrive in the illusion of peace. The silence after the lie, the polite agreement after the gaslight, the fake smile after the boundary violation. That's their playground, but you're not playing anymore. There was a time you'd rather be liked than be aligned. You'd go along just to avoid the tension, but all that peace came with a price, you. And once you saw that the cost of being agreeable was your identity, your voice, your soul, you stopped paying. Imagine this, chosen one. You're in a room where the energy is thick with pretense. You know what's being said isn't real. What's being praised isn't pure. What's being tolerated is manipulation dressed as keeping the peace. Now imagine the moment you speak, calmly, clearly, and truthfully. You don't raise your voice, you raise the standard. And in that still moment, everything shifts. That's the power you've stepped into. You're no longer scared of discomfort because living in denial was the real suffering. They're scared of you now because they can't use silence as a leash. They can't use guilt as a leash. They can't use being nice as a muzzle. You're not apologizing for needing space. You're not shrinking because someone frowns. You're not tiptoeing around tension to avoid the label difficult. You are centered, grounded, and done with emotional submission. That makes you dangerous to their control, to their manipulation, and to the system they built on your silence. Peace that requires self-erasure isn't peace. It's quiet slavery. And you don't do slavery anymore. You do freedom. You do truth. And you do you, fully, loudly, unapologetically. That's not rebellion. That's your healing, and it's shaking their entire foundation. Number 12. You didn't just raise the standard. You became the standard, and that's why they can't touch you now. When the only way to access you is truth, liars lose their power and manipulators lose their mind. They don't hate your boundaries, they hate what your boundaries reveal about them. Because now that you've made honesty the only currency that holds weight, they realize they're broke, spiritually, emotionally, energetically bankrupt. And worse, they know it. You didn't scream, you didn't beg, you simply stopped negotiating with masks. And that subtle shift flipped their whole strategy upside down. They used to run the game by staying just honest enough to keep you hopeful, just present enough to keep you guessing, just wounded enough to make you feel guilty. But now you've drawn a line not with your words, but with your energy. It says, if you want to stand beside me, you have to show up as the real you, not the role you've rehearsed. You became unavailable to everything that required you to shrink, so they called you difficult, when really you just became whole. Manipulators thrive in the gray area. Half-truths, selective memory, emotional baiting. But you require clarity now. They can't twist stories and still be believed. They can't perform remorse and still be forgiven. They can't show up with ego and expect access to your soul. They used to count on your confusion to keep the upper hand. But now, you're not confused. You're clear. Clear about your worth. Clear about your values. Clear about the fact that being nice doesn't mean being available for dysfunction. Imagine this, chosen one. You're a locked door now, but not just locked, keyless. And the only thing that can open it is truth. No charm, no pity, no noise, just truth. That's a price most manipulators refuse to pay because they've built their entire identity around avoiding it. To stay in your life now, they'd have to become someone they've never dared to be. Honest, grounded, real, and that terrifies them more than losing you ever could. That's why they ghost. That's why they twist the narrative. That's why they call you too much, changed, cold. Because the mirror you hold up doesn't flatter them, it exposes them. They hate that you no longer react, that you don't argue, explain, or chase. They're used to power through chaos, but you've made chaos expensive. They can't afford to keep pretending around someone who sees through the performance before the first act even starts. You didn't demand perfection. You simply made integrity the price of admission. And for manipulators, that's too high. So they walk, angry, bitter, and bruised, not because you hurt them, but because they couldn't fool you. Let that sink in. You didn't close the door. You became the door. A door only truth can open. And that's why they're heated. Because you've evolved into someone they can't reach without first facing everything they've spent a lifetime avoiding. They thought your softness meant weakness until you made silence your sword and truth your gatekeeper. You didn't just survive the manipulation, you outgrew the entire system it required. You didn't become harder, you became clearer. And now you're untouchable. Not because you're cold, but because you're whole. So if they whisper, let them. If they retreat, let them. If they burn in the heat of your clarity, let them burn. Because the fire that consumes their illusion is the same fire that forged your freedom. And so, chosen one, now you understand why they're so heated. Because every time you chose truth over comfort, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over control, you shattered their illusion. You didn't just reject manipulation, you evolved beyond it. Let that remind you, their discomfort is proof of your growth. Keep standing firm in your power because you've already won. If this message lit a fire in your soul, drop the number 777 in the comments to confirm you're wide awake. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone else who needs to hear it. Let's spread this clarity, one truth at a time.